Welcome to If I Were the Committee, episode two, where obviously, as in the name, If I Were the Committee, where we react to the college football playoff rankings, which comes out every week. Episode one was amazing. I had Anthony McBarnett, but I brought another friend along with me for episode two, Stephen Gorgei, another guy who I work with. He works in quote unquote the best conference, and I have a lot to talk about that with. He works with the SEC. He does SEC radio for SiriusXM as a producer there, but he also has other works that he will let us know about. Steve, why do I even call you by your first name? Gorgie. That's really what everyone knows you by. Welcome into the show.
Darius, I couldn't be more excited to be here. Look, to me, this is the best time of year because I'm a huge college football guy, a huge hoops guy. We had Kentucky Duke last night. We had the rankings come out right before it. And you're right, I do work in the conference that just means more. And it was a busy day talking about that on our airwaves. So let's get right into it.
I do. For those who don't know, like Gorgie said, the committee dropped in the middle of a basketball game, nonetheless. Who really cares about hoops, in my opinion? It doesn't start until Christmas. But for those who missed it, I will run down the top 12 and the other two, because obviously you got to respect the group of five. Oregon comes in at one, Ohio State two, Texas three, Penn State four, Indiana five, BYU six, Tennessee at seven, Notre Dame at eight, Miami nine, Alabama 10, Ole Miss at 11, Georgia 12, and for the sake of 13, 14, Boise State, SMU. First question, did they get it right this week?
Look, you can always find something to be mad about with this committee, and both sides are mad. You got the people who hate the SEC that are mad because they say the SEC is overranked. You have the SEC people who are mad because they don't like all the Big Ten representation at the top here. I think by and large, Darius, I'm pretty satisfied with what they did. Oregon, undisputed number one. To me, Ohio State has looked like the second best team in the country. Just when you watch them play, when you look at the eye test, you look at how close they played Oregon, you look, they go to Happy Valley, they beat Penn State. And that's what
Fair.
we have to remember with all of this is the committee isn't concerned about your objective rankings. The committee isn't really concerned about using all these metrics that we have at their disposal. Their task has always been find the previously four best teams. Now it's find the, I guess, what is it, seven at large, seven best at large teams. That is what they are always doing because I can nitpick a million things here, but that's what the committee is trying to do. They want to find the best teams in their mind. They're not really worried about objectively finding the best teams.
Okay, see, that's where I want to go at because I work with Dusty and Danny in the morning, and we had Ben on. For those who don't know, Channel 84, Sirius XM, 6 a.m. Here's my issue. When we say best, do we also say deserving? I've gotten this feeling from previous iterations of the committee to even this year, we're going to get to a fact where the committee just wants to monopolize it and go for the capitalistic route. Who has the best matchups? Because this list isn't bad. It's not bad. I will agree. It's not bad. I think I like this list more than what I did last week, even considering Miami losing, Georgia losing, LSU, hell, even them losing and not even being in the top 25 anymore. I'm cool with that. But however, it does look when we get to what the playoff bracket looks like, it seems a little bit more biased. And this is my issue here because Oregon's won. Presuming Miami wins their conference championship, they'll have the four spot. Texas has the two spot. BYU, obviously, we know it goes to the conference championships, but all the exterior, Tennessee, Notre Dame, Indiana, Alabama, Ole Miss, Penn State, Boise State at 12. I get it. We have to guarantee the conference, the best conference championship of the group of five. But I feel like there's some biases. If this was the playoffs, they don't have a home game. So are we really doing the best teams or are we just putting in the deserving teams that make the most money here?
So I think it is about, I think right now you're right. It's about the best matchups, it's about the biggest brands. I look at these rankings and I think that what people thought of you, people like you and me thought of these teams before the season, has way too much to do with where they're ranked now. I mean, you look at some of these teams, SMU is the team that I have the biggest gripe with because you look at them, they're down there at 14, they're 8-1. What really differentiates them from a team like Miami in their own conference? What really differentiates them so far from a team even like Texas up at number 3, because Texas, you look at who they've played, who they've
and
beaten,
lost to
it's not a
Georgia.
lot, and lost to Georgia. And let me add this, when they lost to Georgia, they played two quarterbacks who were both put on their rear end about, it felt like 100 times in that game. They were dominated in that game by Georgia. So to me, I feel like right now, brand and what you were thought of, what people thought of you before the season has far too much to do with where you're ranked right now. But having said all that, I still don't have a huge problem with all of this, because all of these teams have a chance to play their way in. When you look at a team like Georgia, who dropped out of that bracket right now, they're down at number 12 in the rankings. If they beat Tennessee this weekend, they're going to jump right back up. And then for a team like, let's look at who's on the outside, like a Texas A&M. They're sitting there at 7-2. They're on the outside. They're going to have their chances. They played Texas to end the year. It's going to be a huge
Fair.
game. The first time they played since 2011, the renewal of the rivalry. If they lose that game, I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. You're sitting there with 3 losses. You had your chances. So I don't get too worked up about any of this at the moment, because I think it's all going to play itself out, and it's all going to be really exciting over these last 3 weeks.
Here's why I got worked up. I think listening to other people, other media people, including us and the people we work with, the concession of the Big Ten and the SEC, I really it chafes my gears that everybody, and I want to say maybe me and 4 other people across this world will say, this is why we play the games. Everyone automatically goes to, well, the SEC is going to have 4 teams. The Big Ten is going to have 4 teams. As we look at it now, kudos to the Big Ten. Did not expect them to do any of this. My issue with this when the rankings drop, why do we not value the wins the way we value the losses? When I look at Penn State and Indiana, I would flip those in my opinion, or even Indiana
Completely
and
agree.
Ohio State. Like, what are we doing? But when it comes to this idea of brand bias and conference supremacy, I wouldn't bank on this as the most perfect resume eye test that we've got to see with these numbers here. Because if we're doing this correctly, the ACC is just as good as the SEC this year, and if anything, better, because we've had a 4-way tie for conference championships going into that, and the SEC has 3. There's only one clear cut good conference here in my eyes when we look at this season. But why is there? Why does it seem like people are conceding to just the SEC and the Big Ten getting these 4 teams and automatically before we even play these games where half these teams still have to play each other? Might I add?
Well, I want to go back to, so you're saying you think the ACC is a stronger conference than the SEC at this
Did
point. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
I say that from a standpoint of we look at records and we look at the conference records, the ties. If we had to play the scenario game, it's a 4-way tie for the ACC. That's assuming SMU loses a ACC game because right now they're undefeated in the ACC. But there's a 3-way tie amongst the SEC. But all those teams have one, maybe 2 losses, or if they just play, they one team loses. Now you're looking at Texas A&M, Texas, and who Ole Miss in their 3-way tiebreaker.
So I think, to me, it depends on what you value, right? Because if you value something like an
I
FPI
value
metric, that,
winning.
so you value winning, which I get, but if you look, top to bottom in that league, if you stack them up side by side, are you willing to go through it and say side by side, how far do you go down before the SEC has the advantage? Because I think
6.
it's maybe, you think the top 6 in the ACC are better than the top 6 in
I
the
don't know if they're
SEC
better,
side by
but
side?
when you say stack them side by side,
Okay.
we go, let's just look at the top 25. You have Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. That's 5 just within the top 15. Then as soon as you get below that, you have South Carolina, LSU, Missouri. Missouri has always been a fraud to me. That's your outlier. Where the ACC, Miami, SMU, Louisville, and Clemson. That I could live with those 4. I'm not saying Clemson's better. I mean, I'm not saying Louisville's better than your those other 4 teams that I named, that top 4. But I am saying if you go through it, 4 to 4, I can be like, any given Saturday something can happen.
Yeah, I think 1 through 3, I can get down with that. I think Miami, SMU are both very, very good. Those offenses are as good as anybody in the country. Louisville, I think, is a little bit better than they've shown at times this year. And you saw it
Definitely.
when they beat Clemson. But Clemson, like I can't get there with Clemson because they got beat down by Georgia to start the season. We've seen that Georgia isn't quite the same Georgia team. And then when you get below that, when you start going 4 through 12, 13, 15, 16
I
now,
can agree.
that's where I think the SEC has the difference, and that's where you have an advantage because you look at some of these metrics, like you look at an FPI, for example, and there's teams out there like Arkansas. Arkansas is number 30 in the FPI. Well, I would make the argument that Arkansas is probably one of the four worst teams in the SEC. So I feel like the SEC, even when they play that bottom third or that middle third of the conference, they're racking up quality wins. Whereas when you're playing the bottom to middle third in the ACC, you look at the teams like Cal, you look at the teams like Stanford, you look at teams like NC State. I don't feel like it's the same quality. And that's where I don't have as much of a problem with some of the SEC teams being higher.
I will agree on that because I always thought about this and I've had people bring that into my ear where if you just switch Oklahoma, who's having a down year this year, and put them in an ACC, where would they fall? They could easily be a top four ACC team, top five ACC team versus SMU. And this again, no shade to SMU. You guys are the poster child of the orphans of the bought my way into a conference and now look at us. So I 100% am on board with that. So I do agree on that sentiment. I just think if the committee values wins and losses, one loss teams and undefeateds should go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, I
Plain and
can agree
simple.
with you on that. Like, I
Plain
would
and
agree
simple.
with you 100%. If you have a zero in the loss column, you have to be ranked ahead of anybody with a one.
I don't get it. And I want to segue that into the Big Ten conversation because two teams who have lost a game is ranked ahead, Kirk Cignetti in Indiana, and I don't agree with that. Like I get it, the committee goes with the eye test, and you lost to undefeated Oregon now, and then Ohio State beats Penn State, so that creates that. But what happens when another undefeated team sits in your conference and they're behind these two teams? That makes no sense, especially a team like Indiana, who now your best win is against. If we're going to take the brands into this, like they always do, and as much as they say they don't, that Michigan team with that block letter M, that's your best win. Why are you not sitting in at number two? I gladly put you in at number two over but over the first three teams who've all have one losses. I'm just saying, like Texas lost to Georgia. I've already established what are we doing here as a committee if we're talking about the eye test, and I say that very loosely.
And that's where I agree with you 100%. That brand, and like I said earlier, the expectations that people had of you coming into the season matter way too much because if you took the names, the helmets off of all these teams, you just watch them play, and we had a magic tool where you had no idea what team it was, you would definitely say Indiana's one of the what, two or three most impressive teams visually this year.
Without a doubt.
They've trailed once. They've trailed once the entire season. It was against Michigan State, and then they promptly dropped 40 on them after going down 10-0. Like visually, they are impressive. They have one of the best offenses in the country. They've stood up to every test they had, and I get that there hasn't been a lot. But one of the compelling points I was seeing over the last day or so was when you look at their strength of schedule, it's very comparable to Michigan's last year to this point, where Michigan was getting all the props and all the hype as a top 2, 3 team in the country.
Mm-hmm. It's just what matters is that where where we are in trying to figure out like what matters because from the eye test, from what the committee's telling me, and again we've both agreed this list isn't terrible, but what it's telling me is that you losing sometimes means a little bit more, or who you lose to. Let's be specific here. Who you lose to matters more. But then we have number 8 Notre Dame, where who you lost to by far one of the worst teams in FBS football, and yet they're sit here at 8. And again, I get it. You're independent. I get it. You can do all this and all that you want. But if why does losing have such different scales for different teams?
And I think that's part of the problem with this whole process is everybody can have their own definition of what matters. You can say The win and loss record is should be the number one most important thing, but somebody else can cite some sort of metric like game control. And I heard it come up on the ESPN broadcast last night is that one of the reasons that people are high on Ole Miss is because, the games that they've lost were by very few points. They lost in overtime to LSU. They lost a close game to Kentucky. But again, I'll point to Kentucky as one of the worst teams in the SEC, one of the worst teams in the conference there. That shouldn't be held up as a good loss, despite it being a close loss. That is the problem I have with this whole thing. And that's why I've been trying to view it as, okay, this is not an objective exercise. We have to try to figure out what these committee members actually care about. And in every instance, it's a little bit different, it feels like, because for Notre Dame, that loss to a 500 MAC team
Doesn't even
doesn't
matter.
really seem to matter.
And what are we like? This is why we're the committee here on this show. This is why we're the committee because if it doesn't matter, but yet when Miami lose to Georgia Tech, all we heard was, "Oh my gosh, they played with their food, they played with fire, they got burnt." We knew who this Miami team was from that Virginia Tech Hail Mary. We knew what this Miami team was after that. So why all of a sudden they have this loss? Everyone and their dad and their sister goes to Miami's clearly not that good. Well, I thought we when they were winning, everything was fine. And then you go to a Georgia team and from the eye test, got manhandled by Ole Miss. I don't care what the score said because the scores can always look close when it becomes garbage time or when everyone kind of concedes and you just be like, all right, we're just gonna try to get out of here. So when does winning and losing become even? Is it when we get to these last two games before conference championship, or is that something that people should consider now?
I mean, I think I'm with you. I think it should always be the most important thing. Let me ask you this. How do you feel about a team, like an Alabama that's sitting there at 7-2? They have two really big wins. They have that win over, well, they have one huge win, the win over Georgia, and then they just beat down LSU on the road. And LSU is given credit by the committee as a top 25 team, but towards the back end of the top 25. How do you feel about a team like Alabama with two losses being ahead of a one loss team at the end of the year if it comes to that? Are you okay with that? Are you comfortable with that or not?
No, I value winning. I don't. You guys made these schedules. The ads and these universities made these schedules in advance. And if you want to have the cupcake schedule, cool. But if you want to like, and I'll say that throwing Notre Dame under the bus because let's be honest, before the season started, yes, we looked at USC as going to be a great game. We looked at Florida State as going to be a great game. But then once we get to the games that play, the computer tells us these strength of schedules start to drop down when these teams are no longer at where they are. So for Alabama, you with these two losses, and let's pair it up with a SMU, like you said, let's pair it with SMU. One loss. Loss was in what week one before they made their quarterback switch, before they found who their identity was. And let's say Notre Dame, I mean, SMU makes it to the conference championship. I believe they will. They're that good. But I can't sit here in good conscience go, why is SMU on the first two out while Alabama sits there at number 10 or number 8? That's that's clearly unfair because now what we just got to the answer is that you will get penalized for playing in your conference championship game while Alabama, who gets to sit back, kick their feet up, get to rake in all your winnings. And I've had this issue when we saw it last week when they first dropped it. Again, the rankings were fine, but it seems like only two conferences are going to be penalized for playing in conference championship games. And that doesn't make sense to me. It bothers me. Like, how can you have that? And then when you get to these moments, like you said, 7-2, a two-loss Alabama will just sit there and be like, dee, 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 and they walk their way in.
So would you be comfortable if every Power Four conference champion and the runner up, the team they beat in the championship game, made it? Would you like that?
I can respect it way more because you play these games every Saturday in hopes to win a conference championship. And although you came up short, there's still something to play for. And I rather that make up 1 through 12 or what is it, power fours? So 2, 4, 6, 8. You get 1 through 8. I don't care how you seed them after you make your conference championships. But that 5 through 8, sorted, handled out, you're fine. And then group of five teams slotted in there. I'm okay with that. And then make the rest at large. Because at least then we know the best teams, the best teams, Gorgie, got in. I don't care what the number says, but you made it to your conference championship. Georgia's not going to play for a conference championship unless they win out and they need another Ole Miss loss or a Texas loss or something. So you can't say Georgia's the best team. No, because you didn't play that extra week. What did you do? I'd rather if the committee came more with the rules, and I think it is with a lot of us not knowing what this format was going to look like, where they did the 5+7 on the back end, where we're like, what does that mean? I believe no one should be penalized for playing conference championships. And it seems like when this is all said and done, the two conferences that seem to get no respect, but has probably the closest races, will get disrespected the most.
So I'm interested if you think there is a path for the conferences like the ACC and the Big 12 to get to, because I see an interesting one for the Big 12 in particular, because there's a team that we talked about a lot last season. We didn't talk about quite as much this season, but now they're slowly creeping up
You
those
took the
rankings.
words
They're at
out my
number
mouth.
17, the Colorado Buffaloes. I
So
think if we see Colorado and BYU in the Big 12 championship game, we see an undefeated BYU and a two-loss Colorado. Colorado takes the crown. BYU has one loss. I think we're going to see them both.
I I really wanted to go there and I'm glad you did it because I agree. I 100% agree. I don't believe in Kansas State as much as we wanted to because of how close everything has been. And like I said, with the ties, BYU is your clear cut. They're the SMU of their conference. Like we want you, you're undefeated in conference. We believe in you, we trust in you. But there's another team that we clearly can see beating you and not just beating you, probably winning by a 6 point margin here. And I'm all for it. I think if we're 100% honest here, full transparency, I think that's probably the only conference when it comes to these two that gets that extra team in. And I think that's the unfairness that bothers me is because I know, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us have that feeling in our gut as much as we don't want to acknowledge it, is that whoever loses that ACC championship game might as well go be playing in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Like you don't get your New Year's Six, you don't get your playoffs. Get ready to go no Pop Tarts. Get ready to eat the Pop Tart. Like, and I think that's the problem. But I do find that probably the best situation for the Big 12. And Brett Yormark would clearly he would love that for the Big 12. He's all for that. So I love that you brought that up. And I do think Colorado can, at the rate that they're going, they keep this up for the next 2 weeks. I will crown them the Big 12 champions, no hesitation.
So you
And
look at their schedule. They have Utah this weekend at Kansas, Oklahoma State to end the year at home, who hasn't won a conference game. I mean, that's a doable path right there.
it's doable. It's very doable. Utah is where you get nervous. Utah is the only game I think everyone's nervous about because we know what Utah can do, and we don't know what Isaiah Wilson is. We don't know what he is at Utah. We're so used to Kyle Whittingham having his guy. We're so used to him having his guy. But every year he's been hurt. So Isaac Wilson, with all this preparation that you have, can you take down this vastly improved Buffalo's defense in the passing game? Last year, Colorado, you could throw the ball through a banana peel and it was completed for a 28-yard game. So like I do see Colorado being that more interesting team when it comes down to it. The teams that I worry about is the group of five, and it's Boise State and Army. I feel like it has just become a two-team race where obviously we saw what happened in Navy get dismantled by Notre Dame, and I feel like that kind of killed anything. Army has to go play Notre Dame this year. I want to say it's this week or next week. If Army wins, does Army take the driver's seat for the group of five champion, or is there a position that Army and Boise can be two group of five teams in the CFP?
Yeah, I think Army definitely takes that spot, takes the over the driver's seat from Boise State. If they beat Notre Dame, it would be by far the biggest win either of the two teams. I also think that knocks Notre Dame out, essentially. I mean, two losses, one to Army, who is a very good Army team, but the other to a 500 MAC team, I don't think is going to cut it. I don't personally see a path for both Boise State and Army. And I do think that's unfortunate because I think you should be able, if you have a dream season like those two are having, and Boise State came very, very close to upsetting Oregon early in the season, I think there should be a feasible path for both of them,
What
but I
happened to the
just don't
best
see it.
teams, Gorgie?
I
What
just don't
happened
see
to
it
the
because
best
so I think
teams?
that's the thing is I don't think the committee clearly views them as one of the best teams. Otherwise, they wouldn't have them down at number 13 because they're behind a two-loss Ole Miss team. They're behind a two-loss Alabama team. I don't think the committee views them as that, and that's their prerogative. They can view them any way they want because it's a subjective exercise, and that's my problem with this whole thing is that sometimes there are things that matter and other times they don't matter. Like look at head to head, for example, and I'm going to veer a little off the path here, but I'll bring it back around. Is at times head to head matters. And that's why you see Alabama and Ole Miss ahead of Georgia, right? Both those teams beat Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
They're ahead of them. But you stick in the SEC for a second. Well, LSU beat South Carolina, albeit a very close game, albeit there were some bad calls, but they have the same record. They're both 6-3. LSU is one spot behind South Carolina. So why does head to head matter in that case, but it doesn't matter in the other case? That's what I struggle with. And then when you look at a team like Boise State, unfortunately, they're not going to have a chance to go head to head with any of these teams that they're competing with. That is unfortunate. But you look at how they've controlled the games they have played. You look at how close they played Oregon, about as close as Ohio State did, to be perfectly honest. Why are they getting punished for playing the schedule in front of them, for handling the teams in front of them? I don't know. This is where I go back to brand matters too much. Expectations matter too much. I mean, you have Ashton Jeanty, who's going to most likely be a Heisman finalist. I mean, he's a stud. He could play anywhere in the country. Boise State is a very, very good football team, but it doesn't seem to matter. I don't think there's a path for both Army and Boise State just because of how we operate this whole endeavor.
Does this mean, and I know we've all heard it, the whispers and the murmurs of separation. Would this show us that the group of five need their own playoff if that's the case? And I hate that for the sense of this is FBS football, which means anybody can be anybody. But why is there such a superiority complex where they always say it doesn't matter what school you go to, just know you're playing Division 1 football. Why is there such a superiority complex? I think that's something that needs to be studied. Do you think there needs to be a separation if that happens?
I don't want there to be a separation because I think that's part of what makes college football special is you have this large group of schools and we do have the haves like the Alabamas and the have-nots like the East Carolinas of the world. I think that's part of what makes it special is that we have all these schools playing together. What makes it different for me than like the basketball tournament is on the basketball side, if you win your conference, you are in the tournament. You have a chance to compete for a national title no matter what. Now, in football, you can win your conference like Army might, you can win your conference like Boise State might, but only one of you is going to get the opportunity to go, even though you both won your individual conferences. What I would really rather see, and I think we are going to be headed towards expansion, but not the expansion that I would like to see, as I would honestly like to see every conference champion get an automatic bid. I would have no problem with that. I would think that would make it just like the basketball tournament where you are giving every team that wins their conference a chance to compete for a national title. That would be ideal to me.
Explain the expansion that you don't want to see. That I'm pretty sure me and you are fully aware of being in the conversation, but people who don't explain that expansion that we could see.
Yeah, certainly. I think we're going to see expansion with more teams, but not more automatic qualifiers. So I think we're just going to get more at-large bids. So whether it goes to, 14 has been a number that's been talked about. I think 16 could be on the table as well. I think what we are going to see is expansion for more at-large teams. So it's more SEC, more Big Ten, hopefully more ACC, hopefully more Big 12 if that case comes up. But what we're not going to see is more of those group of five schools to me.
What we have been explained to in those moments where like the 4-4-2-2. I What if we get to that and there's going to be every conference isn't going to be the best conference for the next 10 years. What if we get those years where like there's a down year? In my opinion, the SEC is having a down but still a great year. What happens when we cross that bridge? Because like you said, the expansion is coming at some point. How could that affect the overall outlook of college football?
And that's exactly why I'm against that guaranteed, that notion of like, we're going to guarantee the SEC and the Big Ten 4 spots each. Because there are years like this year, it looks like the Big Ten can fill 4 spots with 4 very good teams. But imagine if Indiana was not having this out of nowhere, unexpected year, right? Imagine if Indiana was just normal old Indiana, the Indiana that we've seen for 100
The
years this year,
basketball
right?
school.
Yeah, the basketball school. So who would be in that spot? It would be like a minute. Who would be in that spot right now? I mean, I don't even know.
I feel like
A bad Iowa team. A,
you would have to put in the bad Iowa team or that random, like you said, that extra Big 12 or ACC school. You would have to fill in that spot.
and that's exactly why I'm against guaranteeing a certain number of bids beyond the conference champion for any conference, because there will be times, and I think it's very unlikely in the SEC's case just because there are so many powerhouses in that conference, so many schools committed to football, but it's possible. You never know what might happen. And I just don't like that idea of guaranteeing anything that's not explicitly earned on the field. That's where I'm lockstep with you, Darius, is I want to see it all earned on the field.
It needs to be earned. You play to win the game. And I know we're running out of time. So before I let you go, I have two questions, two parters. One, who was the team that you think was most disrespected? And two, if you had to make any switches in that 1 through 12, who would you take in and who would you take out?
I think it was SMU was the team that was most disrespected. They have the one loss. The one loss is to an undefeated BYU team that the committee ranks as the number 6 team in the country right now. And I think their resume looks, quite frankly, very similar to Texas's. David Hale from ESPN, he wrote a great column. I think he called it the anger index or something along those lines. He compared their resumes, and I think SMU has a very good case that they have a better resume than their in-state partner there, Texas, who's sitting at number 3. They have the
100%.
same record and they have a very similar resume. So to me, it's SMU. I think who has been the most disrespected in this. As far as who I would take out and who I would put in, I got to take somebody out of this top 12 here. That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about who I might take out yet, but let me say I'm going to keep Ohio. I'll go through it. I'll keep
After
Oregon,
everything we
Ohio
just said,
State. I
what
would
we
take out.
value,
I would take out Texas. I would take out Texas, to
the
be quite
number three,
honest.
you would
I
take
would take
Texas
out
out.
the number 3 team in the country, Texas. You know the other one? It's between, for me, it's between Texas and Penn State.
Texas
It's
and Penn
be
State.
Yeah, because I think Texas to me, if we have to say who has visually looked better, Texas to me has visually looked better than Penn State. They
Okay.
have the same number of losses. I'm guessing you might say Alabama, but to me, Alabama, I do value that big win over Georgia. I think it's important. I think the way
It's
they looked
head to
against
head. This
LSU was very important.
just like last year when we looked at the Alabama, Texas jumping Florida State. Did Florida State deserve to be in? Yes. But again, that head to head, and then you beat Georgia. So I 100% understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, let me my final answer on this. Do I think Tennessee has a better resume than Texas? They have the win over Alabama. You know what? It might be controversial to say. If I was, look, I'm a gambler, right? If I was power rating these teams, if I was making lines for a neutral field, yes, I would have Texas favored over Tennessee right now on a neutral field. I would have Texas favored over a lot of teams on a neutral field. But based on resumes, I would drop Texas out and I would actually put Boise State in.
See, this is what I love. People who are dropping it on the table. Look, we should be the committee. We're not scared to say what we need to say. Like, I'm I agree to a certain degree. I would have taken Penn State out because I still would have gave Texas the conference championship nod. But the way you explained it was masterful. I can't explain that more than anybody else has because that's what needs to happen. And again, everyone's talking about, like you said it best. We took what we saw in the previous season and the rankings coming into this and still put that not even in the back of our heads, but in the front of our faces to be like, well, maybe. So I say all that to say that this was probably the most correct but incorrect rankings we've ever gotten, and it's only been 2 weeks. We're definitely going to get more. Gorgie, I want to thank you again for joining me on If I Were the Committee. Definitely will get you back for other projects in the future. Let us know where we can find you on socials and other projects that you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, appreciate the time, Darius. This was a blast. I'm sure I might take a little bit of flack for that take, maybe dropping Texas out, dropping Penn State out. But you know what? I
I'll
stand
fight
by it.
anybody for you. I'll fight them
I
for you.
stay I stand by it. But yeah, you can find me on X at Gorg on Sports. I'm always there tweeting about college sports. You can also find me talking about national college sports landscape, both football and men's basketball, on a podcast called Tailgate Till May. And I also started a new project where I'm covering the Maryland men's basketball team all season long. That's on YouTube. That's wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever. And that's called the Route One Rundown. But really appreciate the time, Darius. It was a blast today.
Dude, this was effing amazing. I'm trying not to cuss on here, but I kind of do. It's always been my thing. But no, I thank you again so much. Like I said, we'll definitely do this again because and I say this in loud whispers, do not believe in BYU, nor do I believe in Notre Dame. But that's neither here nor there. Until next time, everybody, I will see you next week. Another reaction show, another If I Were the Committee. So you guys, thank you again for listening, like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the next video.